Welcome to Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and me, Jim Cunningham.
Jim.
Let the moon hit your eye like a big pizza pie. I'm back from Italy.
You were missed.
I don't think I was, but gee whiz, what a trip. What a country. What
Yes.
food.
Yes, I've been there every time at the time. My wife and I were there for our honeymoon, and we were at a hotel that was just a few blocks from the Vatican. And at that time, when we traveled before we had cell phones, I made her carry a very small walkie-talkie on her person just because she had a tendency to wander off.
Yes.
Because she wasn't used to traveling with someone else. She traveled the world by herself. And so the concept of saying, hey, I'm going over here was as foreign to her as Italy was to me. Anyway, one day we're walking along and I'm hearing this squawking on my walkie-talkie, and I listened and I said, is that German? And she said, I think it's Swiss. I think we're on the Swiss Guards line.
Wow.
So we, parlayed that into breaking into the Vatican and replacing the Pope with an exact duplicate. But that's a story for a different
That's a
time.
whole different mystery. We got to get into that on a different podcast.
Right.
That's it's quite a country. If you haven't been, I can't recommend it highly enough.
Can I tell one more
I think you should.
stupid tourist thing? So we're standing in line to have our picture taken in front of, I forget what it was called, but it's the statue-ish kind of thing that's in the movie Roman Holiday, where you put your hand into it, and if you're a liar, it chops off your hand. It's like a big smiley face mouth.
Yep.
Long line of people waiting to have to take their picture there. But we're tourists, so we stand in line and do it. Go back to the hotel after a long day, decide to go sit up on the roof of the hotel because they have a little garden up there. Go up there, sit down, turn my head, and they have an exact replica of that piece. We could have had a picture of it with no waiting. So my advice is always check the roof of the hotel because they might have their own Leaning Tower of Pisa right on the roof that you can use. Anyway, we've just gone off on a tangent right away. We are in episode 10 of season 5. I'm going to call it episode 510. We're going to listen to chapter 10 of The Linking Rings, which takes place in London. But first and foremost, I want to revisit a couple ideas from our past guest, Tyler Erickson. I've talked before about I met Tyler via Cosmo's DVD series, Real Magic, in which they placed him against a black background. And he stood there with his, whatever that little hat is that he wears. And I think he was wearing a black t-shirt. He just wearing a floating head, basically. But he would just every month give like this little tiny 5-minute masterclass on if you're going to do this, then try doing it this way. And they'd have a close-up of his hands. And I'm not a magician, so I didn't necessarily know what he was saying, but he was so cool. He was like James Bond cool.
He's
and
terrific.
He continues to be that even in real life. Although I don't think he has a license to kill, but he does have a license to kill audiences when it comes to his magic. There we go.
Wow.
Brought it all home. Anyway, we covered a lot of important topics in our longer interview with him, which if I remember, and as we get older, it's entirely possible I won't. I'll put the full interview, a link to that in the show notes. But in this short clip, Tyler explained how he got into actually teaching magic.
When I was at Old Town Magic, a famous trade show magician, Joel Bauer, came through, and I happened to recognize him on sight. He came in and he asked if we had Magic or Genie magazine, and of course we don't because we're a tourist magic shop. But I said, "Are you Joel Bauer?" And he did fess up to that, and 2 guys came into the shop that I had built a relationship with selling magic, and one of them could hear me saying, "Oh, this is Joel Bauer, famous magician. You guys should, count your lucky stars that he's here when you're here." And they asked Joel, "What should I get?" Pointing to the whole wall full of magic. Like, "What should I get?" And Joel said, "Don't get any of that crap. Take lessons from this guy." And he points to me. And I had never thought about giving lessons, but that was, again, one of those planted seeds. And so those were my very first students. And when I moved over to Twin Cities Magic and Costume, it became part of the package that I could teach classes there. And so I started doing that, and I knew I had found my calling. And so after about a year and a half, I decided I was going to go full-time as a magician, performing and teaching.
When you started teaching, how'd you put together a curriculum for beginning magicians?
Well, it's changed over time, but I have always considered myself a close-up magician first, who eventually found his way to the stage. And my relationship to the stage is one where I can do a stage show, people will like it. My heart is not fully in it. Like, I am surrounded by people that love the stage more than anything else in the world of magic. And I am just not as connected to it, but I understand why they love it and what they get from it. And I know it has a whole lot to do with where you draw your power. And so theater has its own kind of collective power, the way the audience moves as one, the way that you can pause and people will wait for you to start speaking again. And close-up magic is different because if you stop talking, there's a reasonable chance someone will come in and fill the void. And so that's very disruptive. If you're used to a theatrical environment, you're not going to like close-up. But what close-up gives you is this power, because people, when they stand right next to you, cannot believe that you can still do it. They have this sense that because you are distant, because you are on a stage, that is what allows you to make things appear and disappear and whatnot. And so once you are in that kind of proximity, they've got nowhere to go. And it hits so much harder that when you go to the stage from a close-up world, you constantly feel like you're failing because it's just not killing them the way you're used to. And I've found my footing for the stage where I get enjoyment from a stage performance, but I'd be lying if I said I love it as much as I do close up. So my early curriculum was drawn from my background in sleight of hand. And so I drew up what I thought would be the fundamental sleights that anybody getting in should know. And one of the first things I found out was that what my understanding of a basic routine was well beyond what actually is basic. It amuses me because I remember being on the other side of that. I remember when my mentor John Bushy said, "Well, here's a basic cups and balls routine," and then just started telling it to me move by move, like I was just going to remember it, And it was the Vernon 3 cup routine. I still like, what was he thinking when he started? I kind of think he knew that it would be overwhelming, but I know when I started teaching and I'm like, well, here's this routine, and it was a multi-phase bit, and I could see people glaze over and not fully absorb it, and I'm like, I'm doing that thing. I'm giving them too much. And so the early curriculum that I developed changed fairly rapidly when I realized the speed at which most people are going to absorb stuff. And of course, what throws you off is there's always some wonderkin that shows up and you tell them something, and 2 or 3 days later, they've got the whole thing down. And you were like, well, see, now they did it, so I guess everybody should be like that. And the less it is, people are different.
He is so good at what he does and is so smart as a human being that it doesn't surprise me that he tumbled and evolved and realized, oh, that's too much. And he's really a bright guy and a very talented magician. And I think equally, or perhaps even a little more talented as a teacher. He's really good.
Yeah.
At
Well,
down.
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
How do you work with him in terms of teaching? Because yours might be, although you think unique to you, there may be listeners who go, oh, that's exactly what I need. I should go online and talk to Tyler. What is your guys' process?
Yeah. So typically, I will approach Tyler not in sort of a general teach me magic sort of way, but hey, for this show, I want to do X. Let's say the most recent time we worked together, I want to do some spoon bending. And Tyler says to me, I'm not 100% knowledgeable on that. So give me a week and I'll do the research and then we'll get together. And then he will come and say, okay, so here's how it's done. Here's how you do it. Here's when you do it. And here's how it all fits together and works. And so for me, it is as so much of my life, and you will corroborate this, triage.
Can I
He
just say, I think it's more ad hoc. Let's say ad
Yeah,
hoc.
okay, I'll go with
Because
that.
triage
I'm
sounds like
happy
there's
with that.
blood spurting somewhere.
Yeah. So he is great for me because I can come to him with a particular problem and say, this is what I need to do. And even if, like in this case of spoon bending, he says, that's not my area, but give me a week and I'll figure it out. He will do that.
Yeah, I
And so-
think there are more people out there than we might imagine who don't necessarily want a teacher to teach them all about magic, but who have a specific problem and they want to go to someone specifically to help them deal with it. And he's a great choice for that. I mean, I've run questions by him for the Eli Marks books. Is it this or that? And he's been very good at that. When I put out the young Eli Marks book, The Curious Mysteries of Eli Marks, and had 10 tricks in it, 10 easy tricks to do. Both Tyler and David Parr went through it and advised me on the wording, advised me on the drawings. Tyler was very good about saying, no, your angle's wrong here, do this. Maybe a half an hour of his time, but it made a huge difference in making things correct. And I think there's probably a lot of performers out there who could benefit from just a short session to talk about this one thing and how to make it better, because he knows a lot about a lot. You
Boy,
know
he really
a
does.
little about a lot, but he knows a lot about a lot.
He knows a lot about a lot. And as I have found, if he doesn't know, he'll flat out tell you, I don't know that.
Yeah.
Give me a week and I'll know that by the time we get together. And that in and of itself is valuable to have somebody that's honest enough to say, I can't take your money yet because I don't have that. That's not an arrow I've got in my quiver, but give me a week and I'll get it.
Right.
That's terrific. Yeah, I can't recommend him highly enough. If you are thinking of learning magic, if you are a magician already and you're thinking, he would be a tremendous resource for you. If it's even if it's, hey, could you look at me doing this and see where it's not right? He's really terrific. I can't recommend him highly enough.
Well, I think just one simple sentence would explain why you should go with him. Who had that and still has that relationship with him to this day? That's Nick DeFont. Nick has always turned to Tyler for help like that. And I think it's kind of worked out for Nick.
Yeah, Nick's doing okay.
Yeah, Nick's doing okay. So we love Tyler Erickson. There's also other stuff we love. So we're gonna jump right into that. This
You
is
need to give a master class in segues.
Oh,
You
I
did
don't think
one
it's a
up
very good.
earlier in this podcast.
I don't think
that was a
I don't think
brilliant
it's
segue.
I don't think it's
and now
no.
there's this. It's
Before I get into my official, I love that. I will say I'd love our listeners put out a call last episode saying, hey, if you have any thoughts about where we should head, send me an email at jgaspard@earthlink.net. Again, that's jgaspard@earthlink.net. And they're stepping up with some ideas. I'm not going to report on them all right now. I will assemble them and we can discuss them in depth later on. But thank you so much. I love that you did that. And there's a TV show I love, and I always say this, I always hesitate to recommend something that might not be available everywhere, but I think eventually everything will be everywhere as these companies continue to merge. And there's a show, it's been on for many, many years. It just, I think, had its last episode last year sometime, called Inside Number 9. Jim, have you ever heard of Inside Number 9?
No.
Well, it's John and Amy safe. I'm not sure it's Jim and Rachel safe because can get a little intense.
We don't
and
mind
a little bit
intense.
violent, a little tiny bit
there's
violent.
where the line is for.
But
commitment.
I'll explain what it is. It is a half-hour story every time. It's a different story. It's different characters. It's a different motif. It's a different everything. You would think you're watching a different show every time because it is a different show. The only things that continue it always takes place in or around the number 9 somehow. A house number 9, police car number 9. There's a 9 element in the location, and it generally stars the guys who write every episode, and those are 2 actors named Reese Shearsmith and Steve Pemberton, who have pretty good careers just as actors, but also have this show. So every episode of Inside Number 9 is a short 30-minute story, kind of along the lines of an O. Henry thing, where there is going to be a twist at the end. Something is going to fall into place at the end. But it is every type of movie or TV show or story you can think of. It's a romantic comedy. It's a farce. It's a serious drama. It's a docudrama. It's a reality show. Every single episode is in different location with a different way of it being shot. And it's always...
But it's the same 2 guys?
the same two guys always show up in some form in it. Sometimes it's a tour de force for one of them. Sometimes they're both semi-minor characters, but they're always in it with other pretty well-known British actors playing some of the parts. We just saw one recently with Nicola Walker in it, and we're big fans of Nicola Walker. She may turn up later, and I love that. And I think magicians would like it because they've said, Pemberton and Shearsmith have said, the show is designed around the idea of misdirection. You think you're going one way, and it turns out we're going another, and it was always there, and you just didn't see it.
I see trees of green.
It's been a while, hasn't it?
Red roses too.
Not playing games anymore.
It was a joke. Exactly.
To myself.
Hey, it's fun, isn't it? Time to play. Inside Number 9 starts Wednesday, 20th of April at 10 on BBC Two and iPlayer.
Where do we get it?
It's on BritBox. There's several seasons of it. Each one is 29 to 30 minutes long. They can be hysterically funny. There's one which is like a silent movie where they play two guys trying to break into this house that appears to be all glass, where you can see everything. And I don't think there's a word of dialogue in it. Like I say, they can be farcical. They can be occasionally violent, a sudden burst of violence, which is why I'm not sure that Rachel is going to love it.
She's not into the violence as much.
But you may want to just watch them on your own and cherry pick a handful that you think will work for her.
Yeah.
But
Although
anyway,
we watched Ozark together, and
if you watched Ozark, you're fine, because we stopped Ozark because it was just too violent. It was too violent.
It was way violent.
So Rachel watched Ozark. What a badass! I had no idea.
She's you wouldn't want to fight her.
She's scrappy.
Yeah, she's scrappy, and like my mother, she fights dirty.
Anyway, that's I love it this time around. Inside Number 9, I think it's on BritBox. You can watch them in any order because there's no connecting tissue except they all take place inside something Number 9, and you're going to see Reese and Steve. This is an example of two actors who have built a way of showing their enormous range as actors, because they do everything in it. Every kind of character, women, men, children. I mean, there's just all over the place. So Inside Number 9.
I'm in.
Reese and Steve. What's yours?
Well, I'm going to put two things together because they are complementary, and they're almost the same, just different enough.
Okay.
And I think listeners of the podcast by this point know that I have a fascination with World War II. My father served in the Navy during World War II, and that has led me to that, along with going to a military high school, had led me to I hate to use the word buff, but that's as close as I can get to it. I'm fascinated by it, and there's always something that I didn't know, because it's such a vast subject, obviously. But there are so many shocking, surprising things that I didn't know. That these two series are just terrific. World War II in color, Road to Victory, and the greatest events of World War II in color. So they have found color footage to support all of the stories that they're telling, whether it's in Road to Victory, where they're kind of highlighting, or the greatest events of World War II. They found this incredible footage, and they tell you through the footage and through interviews with historians the story of whatever it is that they're trying to tell you in this 1-hour episode. And I'm like I say, I'm fascinated by the subject matter, but at this moment I am fascinated by the echoes that I'm picking up.
Yeah.
And it's just shocking to me when some of this stuff comes up, and I go, holy mackerel, that That's not good. Uh, but I can't recommend them both highly enough. Derek Jacobi is the narrator for one of them, or Jacoby. I don't, which
Maybe it's Jacoby for one of them and Jacoby for the other.
He's not the narrator for the second one, but a lot of the experts are the same in both. The footage is incredible. This color footage of World War II.
Isn't that just amazing to just see
it really is.
when you
I
see
don't
this
know
old
if they're
stuff in
coloring
color?
it or if they found it or what, but it's incredible to see
Yeah.
this stuff in color.
By 1944, Paris has been occupied by Nazi Germany for 4 years.
The Germans came in and they just stripped it bare. They were like locusts.
But on the 20th of July, it seems the city has a reason to celebrate.
A German officer pulls a waiter aside and asks him to fill champagne glasses, thinking that they're going to toast the end of Hitler.
But just before the conspirators toast Hitler's end, the truth filters through.
News comes through from Berlin that Hitler has been injured, but he hasn't been killed.
History, to me, is incredible and compelling, and you can't, if we don't pay attention, we get to repeat it. We get to live through it again, and so there might not be a shelf life on history, but right now is a good time, I think, to look at our history and say, wow, that happened, in a way that has some meaning for me in this moment.
Yep, I get that. And if nothing else, looking at when something happened compared to when the next thing happened, you're surprised that, like, oh, the distance between that event and this event is the same as the distance between now and 2015. I thought it was more than that. I remember being rocked back on my heels, and you're talking about something very significant. I'm about to go to the other end of that spectrum when I realized that one of my favorite movies, Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, was made a mere 10 years before I was born. And I thought it was a really old movie. Well, it was. It was made in 1948. And anybody walking around today who's not close to 70, yeah, that's a pretty old movie. But that was a pretty new movie when I was born. I had no idea. Anyway.
It's that timeline thing. I don't know. I hate to mention this because I'm not sure I remember it exactly right. And I don't know. I didn't do any kind of fact checking to find a no snow on this.
Jim, our greatest thing we can offer is misinformation. So go ahead.
Well, then let me give you that. I read a thing that said Cleopatra is closer to the
us than she is to the pyramids.
It was closer to Pizza Hut. She's closer to the invention of the Pizza Hut than she was to the building of the pyramids, which to me was like, what?
Yeah.
How can that? What? I can't wrap my head around that. So it's those kinds of things that Jimmy enjoys.
Yes, well, and Jimmy loves that. So those are great. Thank you for sharing that. I will put links to those in the show notes, and if I can.
They're on the Netflix.
Okay, so it's time to keep reading the book. We are doing. What are we doing? We're doing
Linking Rings.
Doing the Linking Rings. We're doing chapter 10.
So tell us what happened in chapter 9. Why don't you?
The biggest thing in chapter 9 is that Boris was murdered, he was found dead. I don't know if we know he's murdered at that point, but Miss Hess was pretty sure that he was murdered, and that's where we left that one, with her conclusion that the police are sure that someone in this house is a murderer, and that takes us right into chapter 10.
Chapter 10. The surprising and sudden death of Boris had thrown all of us into a sort of limbo, not sure what to do with ourselves or where to turn next. I was itching to do something, anything, to clear Harry's name, but I feared the additional murder had pushed my uncle further up Scotland Yard's list of suspects. I felt helpless in my inability to do anything productive to lower that ranking. Megan and I puttered around for a while, tossing out ideas of how to spend our day. I was thinking a trip back to the Magic Circle was in order to revisit the scene of the first crime and see if it triggered any new avenues of pursuit. Megan was game, but our impromptu plan was cut short when Davis DeVries cornered me about contacting Jake North so we could sort things out. Clearly, DeVries was anxious to get his Catherine Wheel illusion successfully launched this week and felt Jake was the linchpin who could make it happen. So I set aside the plan to head to the Magic Circle and made some attempts to contact Jake, trying all the contacts I had for him. Sadly, after about 20 fruitless minutes, I didn't have much positive news to report. The cell number I have for him has been disconnected, I explained, so I sent him an email, and I got a generic reply telling me to click on a link which took me to his website. On that site, I was given the opportunity to join his mailing list, but it didn't offer any other contact options, although I was entered into a drawing to win an official signed Jake North t-shirt with the slogan, "What are you, blind?" emblazoned across the front. Fingers crossed on that one, but otherwise, I think I've reached a dead end. DeVries pursed his lips thoughtfully. Not much to report on my end either. I left a message with his publicist, he said, and haven't heard anything back from her. She was slow to respond last time, but the indication I got was he was interested in premiering the illusion this week because it would take place at the Magic Circle, his schedule permitting. I followed up the phone call with an email and a text to her, but still, nothing. I felt badly for him. I didn't have any other ideas on how to contact this now reclusive star, ironically, the same actor who would have attended the opening of a grocery store in his earlier days of semi-fame. Is she British? Harry asked. DeVries and I were standing in front of the house, and I hadn't realized Harry and McHugh had planted themselves nearby in patio chairs that offered a fine view of the heath. Is who British? DeVries replied. Jake North's publicist, Harry said. Yes, I believe she is, DeVries said. Then have Baxter call her, Harry suggested. He's the closest thing magicians have to royalty, at least in this country. McHugh nodded in agreement. I concur. A call from Lawrence Baxter will be returned at lightning speed, faster than a call from the Queen herself, I suspect. We didn't have the resources to perform a double-blind experiment to prove McHugh's hypothesis, but we did have Lawrence Baxter, and he was more than happy to place the phone call. We all stood around him while he did it, listening to his polite-to-a-fault message for the publicist, filled with, sorry to bother you, I hope I'm not intruding, and the devastating coup de grace. Anyway, again, this is Lawrence Baxter, and I do hope to hear back from you if you have time. Thanks so much, and have a lovely day. She clearly had time and a last number called button because the phone rang just as Baxter was handing it back to DeVries. Obviously recognizing the power of the resource he had at his disposal, he immediately handed the phone back to Baxter, who navigated through the conversation with consummate skill. The end result was an agreement that her client, Jake North, would in fact premiere the new illusion, and he would also, incidentally, love to have a chat with his dear old friend, Eli Marks. And as luck would have it, he suggested the meeting take place at the Magic Circle. The precise arrangements for that conversation rivaled the cinematic meeting between Michael Corleone and Virgil Sollozzo, minus the hidden revolver, I'm guessing, and bloody denouement. Finally, it was decided this casual conversation would take place the next morning in the executive director's office at the Magic Circle. The agreed-upon participants would be myself, Jake North, and his publicist. Lawrence Baxter would act as my second, and the whole thing would be overseen by executive director Gareth Mackenzie, the man who I had seen on the first night giving pre-show instructions to my Uncle Harry and the not-long-for-this-earth Oscar Carhonen. In addition, although he wasn't officially part of the proceedings, Davis DeVries would be allowed to stand in the hallway and listen in on the conversation, with the understanding his role was to be strictly a silent one. This was only the second time I had seen Gareth Mackenzie, and both times he had been a mass of nerves. I wasn't sure if this was a permanent condition or a reaction to two stressful situations. Although he was dressed in a different suit than the one I'd seen him in on Saturday, this one looked equally baggy. His bald head sported several rivulets of sweat, despite the fact his office and the entire building was excessively cool. Speaking of cool, Jake's publicist was an unflappable brunette who introduced herself to Lawrence Baxter as Stephanie Milbury. In contrast to Gareth Mackenzie, her suit was tailored to perfection, and her hair and makeup were equally coiffed. Her intensity and forced cheer suggested she was fishing for a new client, and Baxter, no stranger to his impact on the general public, did nothing to disabuse her of this notion, at least for the time being. Baxter and I were on time, which allowed Jake to make a showy entrance 5 minutes later, all handshakes and smiles, as everyone in the executive director's office pretended this was the most casual of encounters. Once greetings and introductions had been covered, Mackenzie took it upon himself to introduce the topic under discussion for this hastily called meeting.
"The motto of the Magic Circle," he began, "is in Doxilus Pravata Loqui, which translates from the Latin as not apt to disclose secrets."
A closer translation might be incapable of speaking private things, Lawrence Baxter added, and then recognized correct Latin translations were not the primary concern of this meeting. He nodded at Mackenzie to continue. For his part, Mackenzie's cool attitude toward Baxter from the moment we had arrived showed no signs of thawing. As the president of the board, Lawrence Baxter was technically Mackenzie's boss. However, this seemed to have no dampening effect on his manner toward Baxter, which could best be defined as just this side of pissy.
"Yes, well, the gist of it," Gareth Mackenzie said as everyone turned their attention back to him, "is that magicians, regardless of whether or not you're a member of this organization, have a sacred duty to protect secrets. And while that is generally perceived as keeping the inner workings of our illusions out of public scrutiny, it also means one magician shall not take the secrets of another and call them his or her own. My understanding," he continued, looking from Jake to me and back again, "is there is the suggestion that Mr. North may have presented one of Mr. Mark's illusions as his own on a television broadcast without prior communication or consent."
I looked over at Jake, who had a puzzled look on his face. "Say what?" he said. Despite his recent success and increased level of fame, he had lost none of his California dudeness. In fact, it may have intensified.
"Jake, you did my ambitious dog routine on TV this week without any permission or any credit," I explained.
"Oh, that," Jake said, breaking into a wide smile. "That was just, an accident."
"You accidentally did his trick," Mackenzie repeated slowly. "And how exactly would such an event come about?"
Jake shrugged. Things were going really well on the show, and the crowd was loving me. Then the host asked me to do one more trick, and I was already running on empty. You know how it is, he suggested, looking around the room. Mackenzie said nothing, while Lawrence Baxter provided the slightest of nods in agreement at the notion. "So you did my trick just on the spur of the moment?" I asked. "Absolutely. Never planned to do it. It's your trick, man," he added jovially, falling just short of giving my arm a playful punch. "Then I can't see there's any objection on moving forward with Mr. North presenting my new illusion here this week," Davis DeVries declared from his position in the hallway, as if the matter were entirely wrapped up to everyone's satisfaction. Jake and his publicist started to get up, but Gareth Mackenzie held up a hand to stop them. "One moment, please," he said, summoning his most authoritative voice. It fell short of truly commanding the room, but it did succeed in preventing a sudden exodus. He turned to me.
Mr. Marks, are you satisfied with this explanation?
Not entirely, I said, looking up at Jake, who was poised to make a quick exit. The trouble with doing my ambitious dog routine on the fly, as it were, is it requires a very specific gaffe. I recognized with the publicist in the room I couldn't go into any detail on the nature of the device. Let's just say it requires a unique and special item which one would be unlikely to have on one's person, unless they intended to perform my ambitious dog routine, I added, deciding I had used the word one enough for the day.
I admit to being unfamiliar with the workings of your illusion, Mackenzie said, as Jake reluctantly sat again. But you're saying it's not an impromptu effect, and that it requires deployment of a special element or device?
Yes, I said simply, feeling the executive director had covered all the salient points. Mackenzie nodded and then looked to Jake.
Mr. North.
There was a tense moment, and then Jake broke into a big smile. What can I say? I love the bit. I do it all the time for people, and I always have the gaff on me, he added, turning to me and increasing the intensity of his grin. Believe me, I always tell them it was created by my old pal, Eli Marks. I always give credit where credit is due. This one time, I forgot to say it, and for that, I'm sorry. It won't happen again. He put out his tanned hand, and I looked at it for a long moment before extending my own, paler version. We shook hands, and as we did, I heard a small, muffled whoop from the hallway. DeVries, still standing in the doorway, was grinning widely as he glanced down at his watch. Excellent, he said. So glad you two were able to bury the hatchet and put this behind you. We are good, correct? He looked over at Gareth Mackenzie for confirmation.
That depends.
The executive director turned to me.
Mr. Marks, are you satisfied with Mr. North's explanation?
I felt all the eyes in the room were on me, with DeVries giving me the most intense scrutiny. I considered my options. Sure, I guess, I finally said. Excellent, DeVries said quickly, once again taking a look at his watch. Then why don't we all go up to the theater and steal a quick peek at the Catherine Wheel? Jake jumped up and slapped me on the back. Come on, dude, let's take a look at this sucker, he said with more exuberance than might have been necessary. He followed DeVries and his publicist out of the room. I looked to Lawrence Baxter, who smiled back wryly.
I guess that settles that,
he said, gesturing me toward the door. I grunted in agreement, still not sure what we had actually accomplished. You joining us, Gareth? Baxter said warmly over his shoulder on his way out. I turned back to see if Gareth Mackenzie was following us, but the small, bald man in oversized clothes was staring at Lawrence Baxter as he headed down the hallway. His expression was hard to read, but it felt anything but warm. Once we made it to the theater, it quickly became apparent why DeVries had been so antsy, continually checking his watch during the meeting with the executive director. As it turned out, someone had summoned the press, and consequently, we all walked into an impromptu press conference. A small contingent of media people had arrived and were set up by the front of the stage for the unveiling of the Catherine Wheel, which was currently safely out of sight behind the red velour curtain. I'm so happy to be here today to unveil Davis DeVries' Catherine Wheel, DeVries continued, once he had carefully stepped up on the stage. It's an illusion years in the making, and it will, I hope, join the ranks of other stunning illusions I've designed and created in my long and happy tenure within the magic community. He then segued into a not-so-quick recap of his career as the designer and builder of iconic magical illusions, most of which were connected in the public's eye not to DeVries, but to each magician who had originally performed the illusion. At the conclusion, a reporter raised a hand.
So, Mr. DeVries, with the Catherine wheel...
DeVries cut him off immediately. Sorry, but I should nip this in the bud right away, he said with a quick laugh which almost sounded convincing. The correct name for the illusion is Davis DeVries, Catherine wheel, which I should also point out is trademarked. He ran his hand through his perfectly coiffed white hair and then gestured to the reporter to continue with his question. Looks like DeVries is making a last grab for posterity with this one, Harry growled under his breath to me. I discovered him seated in the back row of the theater along with Angus Bishop and Roy Templeton, all of whom were waiting for some much-needed tech rehearsal time on the stage. But that would have to wait, it appeared, until after DeVries made a pitch for his 15 minutes or more of fame.
Difficult to blame him, Angus whispered. He's worked bloody hard for 40 years, made others famous with his designs, and yet no one knows who he is. The poor bastard.
Roy clucked his tongue.
Poor my bloodshot eye,
he said a bit too loudly, and then continued in a heavy whisper.
Have you seen his place in San Diego? It gives Baxter's Folly a run for its money. He's not hurting, believe you me. It's not always about the money, Harry said.
Most of the time it is, mate, Angus countered.
Yes, but not always, Harry continued. Sometimes it's about posterity, about leaving a legacy. Well, if debts can be considered a legacy, then I'm golden,
Roy said, giggling quietly at his own joke as we settled in and waited for the highly scheduled yet seemingly spontaneous press conference to wrap up. With the last of the official questions out of the way, Davis DeVries moved into performance mode and stepped to the center of the stage. Although he looked every inch the confident designer and inventor, after hearing his peers' remarks about him, I wondered how thin that veneer was and how deep his resentments might run. Did he have any possible grudge against Boris, who never used large-scale illusions like the ones he created? Or against the one-armed Oskar Korhonen? Or, for that matter, against Harry?
Now it is my very great pleasure to introduce to you the performer who will inaugurate the Davis DeVries Catherine wheel, he continued. Although, frankly, no introduction is really required. Please welcome magician, television star, and accomplished actor who is currently selling out on a nightly basis in the West End Theater District, the incomparable Jake North.
He gestured to the wings, and Jake stepped out as video cameras rolled and cameras snapped photo after photo. The sound of all the activity drowned out the snickering in the last row, although I'm not entirely sure if we were all laughing at the same thing. It was either DeVries' statement that Jake was both a television star and an accomplished actor, or the use of the phrase selling out on a nightly basis. Either way, the old guys in the back row were suddenly enjoying the show. I wouldn't say what followed was technically a disaster, but it was clear that Jake had not been completely prepped as to the nature of his commitment. To begin with, every time he mentioned the Catherine wheel, he called it the Cathy wheel. This would require an interruption and clarification from DeVries, which definitely put a crimp in the flow of questions. Try as he might, the full name, Davis DeVries Catherine wheel, did not appear to have the cachet he had been hoping for. Once it became apparent Jake wasn't really helping the cause, DeVries took a new tack and jumped ahead to the actual unveiling of the illusion. Whatever rehearsal this program had gone through looked like it had been for naught, as bombastic introductory music came blaring out of the sound system squarely in the middle of his introduction. DeVries finally conceded to its louder volume and waved to someone backstage, who wisely pulled the ropes that jerkily opened the curtain, finally revealing the device in all its glory. Despite the hiccups along the way, this reveal had clearly been worth the wait. Even after hearing Harry's earlier description of the illusion, I had to admit the first sight of the Catherine wheel, that is, Davis DeVries' Catherine wheel, was stunning. It was imposing and enormous. This impression was enhanced by the small size of the Magic Circle stage, but I suspect it would have looked massive just about anywhere. The thing darn near sparkled like an exploding star when the stage lights hit it, so much so that even the jaded press took a step back and delivered a collective oh and ah. The wheel's spokes jutted out from the hub, which appeared to be encrusted with rubies, sending red reflections bouncing around the room. I'm not sure what the material was. It looked like a mix of chrome and solid gold, but this was no PVC pipe basement workshop creation. This was stunning, more work of art than standard stage illusion. Of course, the reaction of the three magicians next to me in the back row was one you would expect from seasoned pros. Awe mixed with practicality. "That thing fits in 2 travel cases?" Roy Templeton hissed, once the room's first reaction to the illusion had settled. 2 cases. Plus, he says it can be put together by one guy, Harry added, with no tools. "It's like pulling back a screen and discovering the Holy Grail," Angus Bishop whispered reverently. "You hardly even need to do a trick with the bloody thing. Just open the curtain and stand back." Jake appeared to be equally awed. He stepped back to get a better view of the device and might have backed right off the stage if a couple of reporters with quick reactions hadn't reached up to steady him. As he regained his balance, 2 young women dressed in matching sparkly cocktail dresses appeared from the wings and grabbed Jake's arms, positioning him next to the illusion. Each of the women then struck a pose on either side of the slightly dazed actor. "Yes, ladies and gentlemen, this Saturday night, we'll see the first public performance of Davis DeVries' Catherine Wheel," DeVries said, trying to sound dramatic and almost succeeding. It was clear he was a man accustomed to watching from the wings and not commanding center stage. "Performed by Jake North and," he continued, gesturing toward Jake and the 2 women, and then clearly forgetting their names, so he quickly added, "with the trusty aid of these 2 lovely assistants." This was evidently the key photo op portion of the press conference, and the media folks wasted no time capturing image after image of Jake in front of the towering wheel, flanked by 2 smiling models. I noted that the large-scale illusion's placement was exactly where the deadly chair that had taken Oscar Corhonen's life had been situated. I was sitting way in the back, and although the theater has great sight lines, I had to squint a bit to see the expression on Jake's face. I leaned forward once I determined what it was to make sure I was reading him right. Despite all the hoopla going on around him, Jake North looked like he might be physically sick. And as it turned out, I was absolutely right.
Oh boy, big illusions. Things that twirl you on stage. I don't think I would be, my wife and I often walk through the Mall of America when it's super cold outside to get our walks in.
Sure.
And I look at some of those rides and go, there's just I was never built for that. And the idea of being put on this Catherine wheel where you're strapped in and you're spun around at high speed and it seems to be on fire. Do you have any experience at all with big illusions?
Not enormous illusions, but my brother, when I worked for my brother as his backstage assistant, we did the dollhouse, and he did a Super X levitation, a flying carpet. So, I mean, the bigger illusions. I didn't ever have to do anything but help set them up. But so I have some working knowledge of bigger illusions, and our friend Mike Super, friend of the podcast, and one of the guests that we've had, I've worked shows with Mike Super where he has used me to some extent within the confines of big illusions that he's done. And I did a show for Dairy Queen where they were using a really good magician, really good big illusion magician. And they asked me, what should we do? And I said, well, what if you did this? And that's what they ended up doing, with this big illusion. And it was fun for me to go, well, that was kind of fun because that was my idea. They wouldn't have done it that way. The magician wouldn't have done it that way had I not said, what about this idea?
Oh, well, that's great. Anyway, next time, speaking of branding and big illusions, we're going to talk to a magician who started as a dancer, but also started as a magician. She kind of did both things concurrently and is a really good example of someone who sees opportunities and is willing to take them, even if they're not exactly what she was planning on doing, because it will lead to something else. We're talking about Joan Decor, who has had a remarkable career. She is in Vegas right now, I think, but she also is working on doing cruise ships. A delightful chat with Joan. We'll learn all about how she made the transition from Hawaii to Las Vegas. I think she went the wrong direction, but that's just me. Anyway, we'll do that, and then we're going into Chapter 11. No, not bankruptcy. Chapter 11 of The Linking Ring. So until then, if you got any ideas for season 6, drop me an email. There'll be a link in the show notes. Otherwise, if you're up for World War II, there's some links for you there. Or if you want some funny, scary, involving 30-minute shows, look at Inside Number 9. Until then, I say goodbye.
Good day, sir. I said good day.
This has been Behind the Page, the Eli Marks podcast, with your hosts, John Gaspard and Jim Cunningham. Produced by Alberts Bridge Books at Grass Lake Studios. Find this podcast and all the books in the Eli Marks series at EliMarksMysteries.com. That's ELIMARKS Mysteries.com. And thanks for listening.